Our teams are back, of course, talking FF7, we're talking Rebirth. We're here to look at the rest of the Inside Final Fantasy VII Rebirth videos. These are kind of long overdue. To be fair, a little bit, with the second and third episodes, I couldn't get them to, save the subtitles on VLC. I don't know what the problem was. I did it perfectly fine with the first episode, and then trying to do it with the second and third, it just wasn't working. I finally got a workaround now. Now we can do it. Also, the fourth episode is in English, because it just does as, the voice actors or whatever. So that's kind of nice. We don't have to do anything crazy there. We can actually, hear them talk about shit instead of having to just look at the subtitles or whatever the fuck. As per usual, I don't know what all's in these videos other than select things like with the fourth episode where they have the voice actors. I've seen the Matt Mercer, Vincent Valentine clip where he learns in studio that he's going to be voicing Vincent Valentine. It's a pretty cool clip. We'll definitely talk about it, of course. But besides that, I don't really know what all's worth talking about in these videos. We're going to watch it off camera, come back and talk about things that are worth talking about. Let's get into it. First thing I found kind of interesting is Toriyama mentions that there are scenes from the original FF7 that are so famous that it's not really even considered a spoiler to speak of them. And that is something that I can both agree with and disagree with, because there's obviously people who are playing the remake project for the first time that had never played the original FF7, so any sort of famous or iconic moments from the original FF7 they wouldn't know about, right? But at the same time, the original FF7 is 27 years old at this point, and if you're just a gamer, you probably know aspects of FF7, even if you never played it. You know who the characters are, potentially, and also Aerith's fate. That's just such an iconic death in gaming that you maybe don't even have to play the original FF7 to know that she dies in the original game. I kind of understand what he's talking about, but again, there are people who don't know anything about FF7 that are playing Rebirth and FF7 Remake for the first time, not knowing anything. So right here, Toriyama and Nojima talk about kind of the growth of the character of Cloud throughout Remake and leading into Rebirth, how initially he's hired by Tifa and Barret. He's really just there for the money, of course, but then gets close to everybody. He's trying to not be disrespected when it comes to Remake, right? Kind of has his guard up throughout most of that game, but then stepping into Rebirth is when he's really starting to open up with everybody that's in the party. It's definitely something that you love to see, playing through Remake, where you have that kind of asshole Cloud a little bit, right? Where he's kind of guarded, doesn't want to open up and be close to any of these people necessarily, right? But you see him change a little bit throughout Remake, right? He does kind of open up as you get closer and closer to the end. But just seeing him in Rebirth, it's good character growth for the character of Cloud. Dude. I love to see him just having fun with the party. So something I like that they point out here is that when it comes to Rebirth, Tifa's starting to really question Cloud's memory and the events of what happened with the Nibelheim incident. Starts really throwing him harder questions and things like that. And it starts to cause them to have little arguments. And this is something that happens at kind of the very beginning of the game, right after the flashback, right? And when they're in calm on talk on this balcony or whatever it is, they get into a little bit of argument that first night. And that's something I absolutely love. It's something that I'm not sure if I was expecting or not when it came to Rebirth. Obviously there's going to be some level of conflict between Cloud and Tifa because of the misremembering of the events of the Nibelheim incident, right? There was going to be some level of them talking about that at some point. I don't know that I was expecting them to have arguments and kind of get a little heated with each other, dude. And that's something I actually really appreciate because that's realistic, right? With the people you care about, friends, family, significant others, whatever, y'all are going to have conflict. Y'all are going to argue. Y'all are going to get mad at each other. And I'm glad they went that route because they could have just done the we're childhood friends, lovey-dovey type shit and never getting mad at each other or whatever. But they didn't. They had them actually kind of argue a bit, and I love that shit. Nojima mentions that around the time of the original game, a senior programmer came up to him and asked whether or not Tifa and Aerith really get along, I guess, with the original game. And that it was never his intention to depict them that way when it came to writing the scenario, and that this time around, obviously with the remake project, he's trying to lean more into them being friends. I personally didn't ever get a vibe that they didn't like each other in the original game. Maybe it's more noticeable in the Japanese script or something like that, but on the English side of things, I never really got the vibe that Aerith and Tifa aren't exactly close to each other with the OG game. So now we get to the section where they talk about Barret, and they mention Barret's best friend dying, and that the scenario is depicted in the same way as the original, which we're not going to go into a full breakdown here, but I did a whole video talking about the dying segment from Rebirth, right? And besides their history with Corel and losing the arm and him being Marlene's actual dad, it's not really the same at all, right? We broke it down shot for shot, technically, right? It's emotional. I wouldn't say it's as emotional for me as the original FF7. Plus, you follow up the whole Dine segment doing this goofy-ass boss fight with Palmer and this shooting minigame thing, too, and all this other weird shit. It's just, tonally, it's just so often different. It's just, to me, it's just nothing like the original. Not necessarily bad overall, I would say, but it's just not the original at all. So in the Aerith part, they talk about, obviously, the concept of destiny when it came to Remake and trying to overcome that. And the level of awareness is the term they use that Aerith has, where she seems to know kind of what that destiny entails, right? Her ultimate fate. And how when we get to Rebirth, the knowledge that she has seems to be gone. And something that I was a little conflicted. And kind of what I mean by this is that, like, honestly, I never got the sense at the end of Remake that Aerith was losing her connection to the planet, her knowledge of the future, that whole whatever thing. Because I think at one point within Rebirth, she does mention that, like, the Whisperers taking her memories or whatever. That shit happening in the Shinder building where, like, Tifa saves her or whatever, pulls her out of the Whispers. Like, she mentions that sometime in Rebirth. And, like, that's maybe an aspect of her, like, forgetting certain things about the future or whatever the fuck. But that's also, like, before we get to the highway segment and the whole singularity shit, right? And at those moments, she still knows the future and Destiny and breaking away from Destiny and that whole thing, right? So I never got the sense that leading into Rebirth, she wouldn't still have this future vision shit. And I was expecting to see more of that when it came to Rebirth, and we didn't get that. But just kind of like, Aerith just doesn't have it anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. Like, for better or worse, I was expecting there to be more future vision type shit when it came to Rebirth. I mean, even in Remake, Cloud was getting visions of the future, right? He's seen Aerith's death, like, multiple times throughout Remake. And that never happens at all with Rebirth. Like, it's just, what's the explanation for Cloud not getting the visions? Maybe the Whispers took Aerith's memories and all that other shit, but why doesn't Cloud have that now? I don't know. Maybe something that's explained a little bit somewhere in Rebirth and I maybe missed it. I've only played, fully through the story one time so far. So maybe another playthrough will clear that up for me. But as of right now, it just seems like that was like something that I just kind of forgot about. I don't know. Kind of it, honestly, from the second episode. There's not really a whole lot to talk about. There's some things that we could have stopped and talked about a little bit, but they wouldn't have been like groundbreaking or that interesting necessarily. I mean, the last thing they talk about is Zack, of course. They talk about when to show the world through Zack's perspective, like a different perspective from Cloud and his friends, things like that. It's something we've heard them talk about a lot. It's not necessarily new. My thoughts on Zack have changed, I think, a bit, having played Rebirth. I know we're in spoiler territory now when it comes to, we're in April. I'm not going to go into it here with this particular video, but I do have a lot of different thoughts here based on what they're doing with Zack and what they're doing with this particular game, Rebirth. Anyways, on to episode 3.
私はやっぱこう原作 FF7 っていうのはやっぱ子供の頃に一ファンとしてこう
The first thing maybe worth talking about this video is the Cid segment at the beginning, like a couple minutes in. It's not even necessarily about what they're talking about with the character Cid. I just want to kind of comment on the character of Cid in Rebirth. When we first got to see Cid in the trailers, he seemed a little too nice, and that kind of remains true when it comes to actually playing through Rebirth. A lot of people's defense for that was that maybe he gets to know Aerith, or Aerith like touches his face like she did for like Red 13 and Marlene. That calms him down, makes him a little nicer of a guy, whatever. None of that's true. Like that doesn't happen. He's just kind of a nice guy in this game. He can still be like kind of funny and mean-ish sometimes, depending. Like he laughs at Yuffie when she gets like seasick or something, I think, at one point. Stuff like that. But he's never like the asshole Cid that we know. And that's going to be polarizing for some people. I like the backstory they gave, that he knew Ifalna, he knew Aerith's mom. So that can kind of lean into why he's nice. That can kind of make up for it a little bit. But maybe we'll see asshole Cid as we get to the third game, get to Rocky Town, get to Shara, all that other shit, that he might become the asshole then. At least as of right now, when it comes to Rebirth, he's not really the kind of character we were expecting. And I don't know how people are going to feel on that. I don't necessarily need him to be like the full-fledged like piece of shit. Honestly, he kind of is when we first meet him, right? He doesn't need to be that bad, but I just needed that like kind of edge to him, and you don't get that with Rebirth. Maybe they're saving that for the third game. But as of right now, it's just not the Cid that we were expecting. So in the Red 13 section, they talk about obviously him being kind of serious when it comes to Remake, when we kind of first meet him, and then as we get to Rebirth, we get to see the more fun side of him. I will say, if you guys have played Rebirth and you got to the Cosmo Canyon section, it's a little jarring. Like I actually tweeted about this when I was playing through the game at the time. Obviously, if you played Rebirth and you got to that section, you know what I'm talking about. But the change in personality, but also his voice, was very hard to handle at first. I got used to it by the end of the game, obviously, because you hear it a lot. But man, when you're used to hearing like the Red 13 voice that we hear at the end of Remake and the first like half or third of Rebirth, and for him to like completely just flip it to a complete different style of voice, a young teenager voice. And I know he's supposed to be that technically, in terms of like compared to human years versus his species years, he's technically like a teenager. I get it. I just don't know that I was ready for it. Thought it was a little bit weird. Honestly, I don't even like think that I dislike it at all. I think I kind of did it first just because I'm like, what is this? I'm so used to this other voice and this other personality. I do like that we get to see more from him, more of his personality. Get to see Red 13 having more fun. Even before we get to the voice, you get to see him like dress up in the Shinra suit on the ship with the card fucking tournament or whatever, and get to see him like acting out and doing like some Michael Jackson dances and shit or whatever. Like, that shit's fun. I like to see that stuff. But just he does open up more after Cosmo Canyon, which I do like. It's just the voice was hard to handle at first. They do also mention, of course, him riding the Chocobo, that this was like a must for Nomura, like it had to be in the game. But what's interesting here is that they do mention that there was multiple different like animations for how he was riding the chocobo. So like the one that we have in the game is not the only one that was ever made. And I'm very curious if we'll ever get to see that. Maybe that could be in like the Ultimania or maybe a future Material Ultimania, maybe something like that. Something that shows kind of more behind the scenes type shit. Be kind of interested in what other like poses and shit they were trying out for Red 13 riding the chocobo. And to be honest, that's all there really was to talk about from the third episode. There was even less to talk about from that than the second episode, which kind of sucks. I was hoping for a little more from it, but whatever. Anyways, moving on to the fourth and last episode. So this one opens up with most of the VAs talking about the character of Sephiroth, and they all have different interesting kind of takes, I suppose, but the most interesting for me is Matt Mercer, of course, the voice of Vincent Valentine, and what he says.
He was made into a monster, not of his own choice, and it was the realization that he essentially had no path but to become a monster that broke him and forced him to embrace that. You can't wait to see how much more of that thread he pulls from Cloud.
I think his take was the most interesting just because he truly understands. I'm not saying the other VAs don't. It's just like what he says for this like interview or whatever. Like he completely understands what's going on with Sephiroth. And it's not just this guy who is excited to voice Vincent Valentine. He's been wanting to voice that character for a long time. He seems to actually legitimately be a fan of Final Fantasy VII and truly understand the story. So if I can just be completely honest here, we're about to skip like a lot of this video. They have each of the voice actors talking about their respective characters for a few minutes. And it's interesting to hear, but there's just not a lot to talk about, right? To break down or discuss necessarily. It's cool to hear everybody, how passionate they are about the particular characters. And I'm not trying to downplay anything that they say in their segments. There's just not a lot to talk about with Cody Christian's segment, Barbarian's segment, and Brown and White's segment about their respective characters. But next we're getting into John Eric Bentley and Barret, which I do love.
Only dumbasses believe that shit.
Question. Does that make me a dumbass?
Barrett's a leader. He's a father. He's a pretend father to some of the members of Avalanche. I would say definitely Cloud, unknowingly to both at times.
Not the gay man. I just love what he says right there. He's kind of the father figure to the group, which a lot of us in the community pick up on, right? It's probably meant to be that anyways, from like the dev perspective. But it's just cool to hear the VA say that as well. Like that, even from his perspective, like he views Barret as like kind of the father figure of the party, especially to Cloud, who Cloud doesn't have a father, and to annoyingly to both of them at times, right? Where
you know, from the moment the train lands and you know Cloud jumps off, and you better be worth every penny, Merc. You see him as this commanding big guy, like, hey, it's about the mission, let's go. And
there's just nothing too important there. I just wanted to highlight him just tapping into the Barret voice so easily. Like he's just talking nonchalantly about the beginning of Remake and just right into the worth every penny Merc line. And that was just so cool. So cool to see. I don't think I've ever seen him doing the voiceover work, like him actually recording as Barret. So it's just kind of cool to see.
one of the most difficult things about portraying Barret is that I never want him to come off as a caricature or come off as a stereotype or be looked at in a negative way because of his culture, his race, his creed.
Obviously a conversation that has existed around the character of Barret since the original FF7, his portrayal being racist or stereotypical or a caricature, as John Eric Bentley said there. It's something that's hard to comment on whenever you're a white guy, a very pale, disgustingly white guy. Like, people pass off your interpretation of this shit and how you feel about it because you're not a person of color. So it's kind of one of those things that's I've talked about in the past, but most people brush it off just because of the color of my skin. That being said, I've never looked at Barret as an offensive character. Maybe with the original FF7 you could go that route, but people are trying to do that with the remake project, and I think that's just fucking ridiculous because I think there's nothing about him that's offensive or racist. I remember there's a Kotaku article specifically about when we first got the first trailer, the State of Play teaser trailer, and the Kotaku wrote an article about how offensive Barret was, even though he spoke like one or two sentences, maybe probably even less than a sentence of words in that trailer, and they were trying to he's fucking Mr. T again, goddammit. And I talked about it back then. I thought it was ridiculous then. I think it's ridiculous now, and it's nice to hear that that's something that obviously goes into John Eric Bentley's work when it comes to portraying Barret, is he doesn't want him to be that. He even goes on to say, right after the part that we played of John talking, that Barret's not as angry as people think he is, even if you're somebody that played the original FF7.
He's not as angry as most people think he is, especially for those who played the original. But in Rebirth, Barret is very caring, but self-reflecting. So you get to see the actual center of who he is because of his story being told.
Something people tend to confuse with the character of Barret is that because he's loud, they think he's just that stereotypical loud black guy that he's being portrayed as, but in fact he's just passionate. Just a passionate character. He's passionate about what he believes in and his feelings and people he cares about and all that other shit, right? We're not going to go into a whole breakdown here of the character of Barret. but I think most people that play FF7 understand that.
A lot of interpretation came from me for Barret. I mean, I have an uncle who actually sounds like Barret. So I'm like, let me just put, my uncle into this too. My uncle doesn't have as many layers as Barret. So I was just like, oh, thanks for the voice, Uncle. I'll take some of that and, do Barret with that. But
I thought that was pretty damn cool. That's like a fact I'd never heard about when it comes to the remake project, is that like the inspiration for Barret's voice for John was his uncle. It's kind of interesting, dude. It's something I just never knew. We then have to skip past another couple of the VAs. It's not that it's not interesting to hear them talk about their characters, because it is, but we're here to kind of get some really interesting bits of information or some brand new information when it comes to this channel, right? And there's just not really that from these particular VAs, unfortunately. But we then get into Matt Mercer talking about Vincent Valentine, which, again, he's an actual fan. Like, you can tell by just him talking about kind of the history of Vincent and the Shinra Company and things like that towards the beginning of his section. He's an actual fan, and that he's been kind of waiting on this role for a very, very long time.
Vincent Valentine represents a vestige of the dark history of Shinra. He represents kind of the surviving shadow of the people that were trounced by Shinra's initiatives and ideals. He represents the history of what got the company to where it is now, coming back to haunt it.
I've said this in the past before, but I personally like that my VAs are fans of the game. Now, some people say they don't really care about that, so on and so forth. But I just do. I just like that they know the source material, right? They don't necessarily have to be trying to mimic previous VAs or anything like that. But it's knowing exactly, what the story is, as opposed to just going in blind and just reading your lines. I'm a fan of the former.
I had dreams back when I started out as a voice actor about one day having an opportunity to read for this game, if it ever came to pass. For the many years that everyone was waiting for the remake to possibly be a thing. I think my fondest memory working on this game was when I realized who I was playing.
This is, of course, whenever Matt Mercer learns in studio when he's recording for what he thinks is just like random NPCs, that he's going to be playing the character of Vincent Valentine. It's possible that you've already seen this clip. Obviously, these videos have been out for a little while now at this point, but this particular clip was going around on social media, which is how I first seen it. But it's actually wonderful. Like, what a reveal. They could have just been like, dude, you're voicing Vincent. But they went through like the effort of making like this kind of surprise video package, setting up this camera to kind of record his reaction. Just love that shit, man.
They brought me in to record background voices, just a couple of random people in Nibelheim or whatever, and partway into the session, the screen began to glitch out.
It's weird. Doing something weird here. Hold on.
And it led to this weird black screen display into text of, what if you were playing a different character?
What the hell is this?
And so they revealed to me in session that I was actually there to record Vincent instead of these background characters.
No. Are you f***ing serious? Oh man, I'm not gonna lie. This fucking means a lot to me.
And it kind of broke me in a beautiful way. I think that's going to be a particular memory I carry with me for a very, very long time.
I absolutely love that clip, man. Even though I've seen it like I don't know how many times at this point, just watching it back right now as I'm making the video, I still get chills. Seeing his reaction to getting to play Vincent, this character he's wanted to portray forever. And there's that passion, wanting to be this character for so long and finally getting that role. I can't wait to see what he does with it. We get a decent little chunk of Vincent in Rebirth, obviously, but he's not a playable character. Not necessarily a main character, so to speak, just yet. But man, when we get to that third game, I can't really wait to see what Matt Mercer does with it. And that'll actually be it. There's like a minute or so afterwards. I thought they're going to give us Cid, because they have Cid say something right after Matt Mercer gets done talking. I thought we were going to get a little bit of the Cid VA, but we don't get that just yet, which is a little underwhelming. Also, no Tyler Hoechlin. I do wonder, like, I think he's been at conventions and shit before, but, like, he has not done a whole lot when it comes to the remake project that I've ever seen. I've never really seen him in, like, sit-down interviews or anything. Maybe he's done it a little bit here and there. And maybe in, like actual regular, like, article-type interviews where they just, write down what somebody says or whatever, type what somebody says. But it would have been nice to have Tyler Hoechlin here talking about the character of Sephiroth. I wonder if that's, like, intentional. Do they want him to be, like, kind of mysterious because he's the villain of the game? They don't want him talking too much about the game or something like that. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe he's just a really busy guy, but it would have been nice to get a little bit of some Tyler Hoechlin. That's definitely missing in this. But yeah, that's pretty much the video, my dudes. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about from this, like from these 3 videos. Like we did the first episode the other day, its own video, and that was like 15 plus minutes or some shit. And we broke down 3 videos with this particular video, but we're barely going to break like 20 minutes with it, right? So it's kind of sucks that there wasn't like a ton of information to talk about, but these weren't meant to be necessarily like spoiler kind of talks of the game. They're trying to be still kind of vague, even though these videos are coming out, kind of well after the launch of the game. Yeah, that's the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We Coltrane, we in here. Like Rogaine or leave it. Like Cobain.